Hi, everyone. Welcome to another PredRev Live. We're so excited to have you all back. Excited to have Justin Michael joining us on the live as well. First time, we last saw you for Own Your Growth. You did a talk on Own Your Growth, so we're excited to have you back. I think a great place to start, everybody, just to get a little engagement going in the chat. I would love to hear from you guys, since it is the topic of our live. Are you pro tech-enabled sales? Or are you old school and you really think that it's humans that are what makes sales great and effective? I'd love to hear it. So pro or against tech-powered, tech-enabled sales. And yeah, I'd love to hear that if you drop it in the chat. I'll give a couple minutes for everyone to trickle in here before we really dive into things. But we're very excited to have this topic up. Justin, when did you really get into tech in sales?
Wow, yeah, great question. I actually started writing this book a couple of years ago, and remarkably, some of the authors that I really look up to and respect, one looked at the manuscript and said, "You need to not write this. Like, this is bad. Don't release this into the world like I was, selling cigarettes or something." I started really power using tech. I'd say 10 years ago when Yesware and ToutApp came out, because I was just doing so many cold emails and I was using data.com. I was just trying to cold call. I was kind of looking at Mike Weinberg stuff and definitely Aaron Ross. I read that in 2011. And I was in Silicon Valley trying to figure out how to do this whole outbound sales thing. And I started getting these emails that were automated. And I thought, okay, there's this company, actually Gainsight, that was automating emails at me. And it turned out, I contacted the rep, and it turned out it was templates in ToutApp that she was slowly sending out. This is before outreaches, before you could actually even have any automation of multiple steps. So that's kind of where it started. I don't know if it was possible to do it prior to that. Maybe.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, good place for us to start and kind of let you guys know what we're going to be diving into today. And we really do want it to be interactive. So thank you to the couple of you, Eric, Onstruck, who have said old school and then super pro tech sales. We're already 50-50 here. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. And the reason that we're talking about this today and the reason it's so timely is because the market is increasingly getting harder to crack. There are so many companies working remotely, creating a quality sales pipeline in traditional ways is getting more and more challenging. So in this session of PredRev Live, we're going to chat to our guest, Justin Michael, who's the co-founder at HYPCCCYCL, a well-known RevOps and kind of tech-enabled sales connoisseur. And so we're really excited to dive into some kind of practical guidance on maximizing your results and finding the right tech tools and data for success in your business. So the reason that I asked this question, the prevailing order for SDRs today is anti-tech. Why do you think that is, Justin?
That's really interesting. There is an old school mentality of the tech didn't work. The emails don't convert. We need to go back to the old school methodologies. Now, RevOps is really popular, and there's a ton of tool companies that are pushing their tools. But I think with social selling and when all the sequencers came out, it became a crutch and everyone leaned on that. And there's nearly 1 million SDRs and they're pushing so hard on digital. I think the leadership is going, we need to go back to these older approaches. The truth is, I think it's both. I think you need quality strategic selling approaches that you then amplify. Fully automated the human out of the process is very hard to do. Technically, 70% of it could be done by a machine. But, I talked to this executive. He was number 10 at Marketo. He's now over at Syncari. He says his phone never rings. And if anyone just calls his phone, he'll pick up and take the meeting. And I do the same thing. I released my cell phone number into LeadIQ, ZoomInfo. The top databases pretty much get called by Gong and Chorus. Their reps always call me. So well done there. ZoomInfo calls me too, but that's it. And it's kind of amazing. So are you for or against tools? I mean, are you for or against the automobile? Do we need faster horses? Is Tesla going to be the next vehicle? I mean, are we going to have a gas-powered society? No, it's going to be Hyperloops. It's going to be, clean energy.
Mhm.
So it's you can stand right now on the precipice of history, but history just repeats, and better technology just replaces the Luddites, and humans will have a place. Actually, the first industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, is going to take out traditional job titles like SDRs, but it's going to create a huge new category
Yeah.
of analysis for revenue. Things like guided selling. I could go on forever, but I want to keep this interactive too and get questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious to know, from those of you that are anti-tech and pro kind of the old school way, why is that? Is it some of those things that Justin just mentioned where, you've tried the tools and the tools haven't worked, you haven't seen the success from them? I'm really curious to know whether it's kind of a lack of success with tools, or rather whether it's because you've had more success with the human. And I know those two things kind of being this two sides of the same coin, but I'd love if you guys could drop that in. And then while you are letting us know that stuff, and we'll totally touch on it as it comes through the chat, I want to talk about some of the myths, Justin, around RevOps, both for and against. So let's first talk about for, to kind of build the picture. But when people kind of imagine, you say like we can't get rid of the human entirely, and I think some people think RevOps can. They're like, this personalization at scale, I can personalize to millions of people and not even have to think about it. What are some of the myths that you hear when people are thinking about the capabilities of RevOps?
Um, there's a huge desire to just eliminate sales development altogether. I don't know if this gets talked about a lot, because we're going to have a million SDRs and 5 billion is getting poured in. But the minute you close the door and ask them, like, what would you really want to build? They say, let's get rid of SDRs. Like, can we just program the machines to set the meetings? And so there's an awesome company that is doing autonomous campaigns called rightbound.io. I was part of a company called Outbound Works. It was the co-founder of Datanyze, Ben Sardella. It got acquired. And what we're trying to do is fully automate sales development. And while you try to fully automate it, it's hard because LinkedIn has a closed API, and there's no way really to automate inside LinkedIn in a way that's really congruent with their terms of service. The question is, if you could fully automate sales development, it would get regulated, because you can't dupe consumers. You can't, right? I don't have a problem personally getting contacted by a robot if it says, hi, this is Pizza Hut's AI bot.
Mm.
And if it even synthesized a human voice like an IVR and started talking to me, well, it's convenient. I just use it. So if someone sends me an email that passes the Turing test and it's so hyper personalized that it fools me, it would be just as effective as if it just said sent from Justin Michael's AI. So the
Mhm.
first myth is that the goal of all this is to replace humans, because it's really not. It's more of a Jarvis. It's more of like, how bad Clippy was? You're sitting in Microsoft Word in the 90s and it's like Vista, like your machine dies and the Clippy's jumping up and down. You're just like, it's the worst. The assistant to the seller can be awesome. Imagine we're on the Zoom call. I've got a heads up display. It's telling me, right, the latest tweets, things from thought leaders. It's synthesizing. It's
Mhm.
giving me cues right now, research that I could be referencing. If I'm selling, it can be reading my emotions. It can be benchmarking my listen to talk ratio, my tonality. It can be pulling up information on you as the prospect and feeding me the last, 3 PDFs that you downloaded, giving me right now, cueing me like Kit in Knight Rider. It could be like Hal in 2001. It could be influencing the way I'm selling right
Mhm.
now. And that's really compelling. That's better than the use of RevOps or tech stacks to fool or replace. It's more to like the Navy SEAL, right? A modern Navy SEAL is like $1 million in gear.
Mhm.
And onboard computers, there's like I was reading about this project to put VR into soldiers so they can see in the field like where they are, GPS,
Mhm.
and it's just going to get totally space age for selling.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I had somebody prospect me the other day. Thinking about it, I'm kind of realizing that I'm not on the fence. I'm like towards the tech side, but I'm still sort of like stuck a little bit in. I like some of the tools and I'm kind of wary or skeptical of some of the other ones. Like somebody sent me a LinkedIn message, a prospecting message on LinkedIn that was very custom based on stuff, both my work experience, my personal life, a whole bunch of a really custom message. And at the end, he said something like, and and in your role, you know how important customization is and how much easier it would be if you could customize easily with an AI like I just did. I was like,
Yeah.
no way. And so I actually didn't respond. Like my knee jerk reaction to that was like, I don't think that's real. Like, no. And I just never re-engaged. Um, but it sounds like we've got some people on the line like Scott, where you've had more success with tools, and that's why you're pro tools and pro moving in that direction. And I'd love to hear if you could jot down a couple of those tools that you are using, Scott. I'd love to know, what they are and how they've made your life easier. And then Justin, let's talk about some of the tools that you think are great that can kind of make prospecting more sophisticated for SDRs.
Yeah, thanks. So it's interesting. Like research, there's a stack in my book. I talk about an essential stack and then a more sophisticated stack. There's AI and ML for everything. It's like a layer cake. What happened with me is I started going through sales training. I went through Sandler training. I absolutely loved it. 2 days, top Oracle trainer. I'm learning about the submarine and the pendulum and the IR theory and reverse selling and this and that and that. And then I sat down and I'm like, okay, I'm back at my job. My job is I go to Sales Navigator and I can't get a phone number and email. So I go to Zoom Info or Lead IQ, and then I get a phone number and email. And then I have a template that worked before that I put somewhere, but then I have to contact this person 5 to 12 times. And it was weird. I was like, well, sales is not a phone and a pad. Sales is LinkedIn plus phone numbers and emails plus automate that plus, okay, now to automate phone. So then I try to scale that. And that's like the base stack. You've got to have like a social intelligence piece, a data piece, an automator of the emails, an automator of the calls. And then it gets even crazier because then you can automate the research. There's this thing called Cheetah IQ, which just goes through and pulls out the 10K and 10Q nuggets into snippets into a sequencer file. There's technology now that can go listen to every podcast. Imagine like Andy Paul at Ring DNA, and you just like go send an AI to listen to all his podcasts and pull out the most interesting stuff. And then I write him an email referencing 200 of his podcasts, the top 3 moments. I mean, so there's the research you can automate. And then there's all sorts of writing, like real-time evaluation of writing, like the Flesch-Kincaid score, what's the tonality? There's psychographic profiles where you can read with Crystal knows, like you can look at all their profiles and figure out their disc profile. And like, it just goes forever, really. We have a Cambrian explosion of tech. And I don't know, I'm pretty neutral. If it works for you, it's good. But I would say just be like a lab, have like an X labs at your company and start getting into the funnel of all these vendors and testing it. And that's why I created the book. It's almost a buyer's guide because there's 500 SDR tools now. And there's 1,000 sales tools now, but you go to MarTech and there's 7,000. So we're still, primitive.
A little bit behind. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think, what comes to mind for me is that with every channel that has existed for sales, it eventually becomes saturated. Obviously, like the rate of change is so much quicker with technology. There's innovation happening quicker than with any, like just the invention of a tool. Now it's, so much more complex. But do you think that there's a moment where the prospect becomes desensitized to even this stuff? Or do you think that it's got a like an infinite path, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I went through 400 different tools probably to research this. And now the entire ecosystem has reached out showing me tools. I find out about tools. There's this tool, right? What it does, it's actually morphing. It morphs your face. So like you can, it can automatically morph the video. So you can record one video and then it can morph you saying a different first name for every other video. So it's getting
like deep fake yourself.
Yeah, you can use deep fakes or just even a person that doesn't exist on a video that you morph. This thing called synthesio. Like I had this bot called Bridget that would show up and narrate this stuff. What happens is if this is taken to 2035, 2050, you basically have a buying bot and a selling bot. Because at a certain point, at 1,000 emails a day, like in the Fortune 500, if you're a CIO, you're getting hit up 200 times a day. You have to have an executive assistant, even an alternate email. So basically you have sellers and executive assistants. So why wouldn't the executive assistant just be an artificial intelligence and the seller be an artificial intelligence, and they just run a big data crunching algorithm on the likelihood of the solution to pair in the ROI. And this all happens in a nanosecond at the speed of high frequency trade. And then literally in one CRM, the CIO goes, oh, gets an alert. Here's a vendor I should meet with. And then the seller goes, oh, looks like a match. So all the matching and qualification and ROI build and all that could be done. And then they just show up to the meeting. Now, here's where the human comes back. You have to have empathy, synthesis, the ability to, the human brain, one human brain is still more powerful than all the compute on the earth, but it won't always be that way, which is totally crazy. So to put this into layman's terms, within a couple of years, the best thing you can do is referral selling and using warm intros and co-selling, like Brendan Cassidy, that company co-sell.io. Basically, if I'm selling security SaaS and this other seller is security SaaS and we share the prospect, we can kind of co-sell because that can't be replaced by the machine. Like, I met Aaron Ross, but I was introduced through a certain connection that never changes. That can't be synthesized. So yeah, what's strange, after looking at the book forever, it came down to referrals. And I know that's core to Sales Navigator, right? The warm intro, the team link intro, they've built the whole empire on that idea because it's not susceptible. You can't fool it, that's where I'm at. But who knows? LinkedIn could get totally disintermediated and dismantled. I have no idea.
Totally. Yeah. So we've got some input here on the tools that are being used by the people that are joining us live right now. We have a whole bunch, so I'm just going to kind of cherry pick a couple of them. We've got some of our classic things like Crunchbase, we've got LinkedIn Sales Navigator, but then we've got, and HubSpot, that kind of thing. But we've got a couple of other things like Flowchat, Alfred Call, Jarvis.ai, Five9 for outbound calling. Apparently for Scott, calling it automation was huge. But the biggest hurdle was avoiding getting flagged as spam caller ID. And then Scott said then they moved on to texting. And Eric's asking, well, how do you stay compliant there? Like, how do you avoid those compliance issues? So what are your thoughts on, like calling spam there and then text and compliance there?
The most underutilized technology in the stack right now is actually, they're called, so the main sequencing of email is called a SEP, an SEP, Sales Engagement Platform. And it's called that because the main leaders, Outreach has sequences and SalesLoft has cadences. And so to call it a sequence is really, for me, I'm neutral to the environment. There's 125 sales engagement platforms. Then there's this thing called a PAD, which is a parallel assisted dialer. And the problem is people think it's all dialers because there's 200 dialers, but a PAD is parallel, meaning multiple phone numbers, 4 to 10 phone numbers fire at once. And they have a hot switching technology where the prospect can't quite hear the beep. Sometimes it's a little murky there, but it's pretty seamless. And that category is dominated by technology like Connect and Sell. And I've now used this stuff at scale. And it can be more expensive than a dialer, but it's incredible because you can do 200 dials in a couple hours, which is the equivalent of 16 hours of full-time work. You'll probably talk to maybe 10 executive assistants on 200 dials on 8-hour days. You can talk to 20 people in an hour and a half in 2 hours. So I did an exhibition on one of these pads and I drove $1.2 million in qualified pipeline in 20 non-consecutive hours. And a lot of those deals did close just to prove a point. So if you're automating your emails, why aren't you automating your calls? And I'm not saying a robot is calling for you like Google Duplex, but your ability to hit the contact data. So I've taken really dirty data that doesn't convert well and hit it at 10x and just churned through it and still had awesome results. So I've done on like B- data on a 10x dialer, bam, 20 conversations. Human verified A+ data on a better dialer, really interesting, higher quality. And then I'm calling all C levels on cell phones. So it's pretty much as crazy as possible. And it converts really well. And another big thing people aren't doing is they're not buying data. They're going, oh, I got the data provider. And ZoomInfo is the leader, and that's awesome. But you should really be buying 4 or 5 data providers, creating an ETL or a data lake, and having a real data operation, and even trying to source your own data with a VA layer.
So two thoughts there. Back on the call, automating the calls. My concern would always be like, what if someone picks up or multiple pick up at the same time kind of thing. I don't know how often that actually happens
Yeah,
based on the volume of calls that are going through, but yeah.
that's actually part of why that technology is patented and how it was able to take off, because it's really hard to do. So it's actually, I'm not exactly sure how it works. It's kind of my job to know how it works, but they figured out a way to switch the calling fast enough for the telephony that the prospect doesn't get hung up on, and
Hmm.
there aren't a lot of people waiting in the in the
Right.
wings. So
And
they
there's not like
that
missed calls on.
exactly. Although
Yeah.
I do hear about prospects that are getting somewhat robo dialed, like there's like, I just got 6 calls from Florida. So I mean, some of the
Mhm.
providers do this in different ways. They've patented ways, and some of them aren't as high quality. I do know for sure that like Connect and Sell, they sponsor me, full disclosure. You know, and thank you for Connect and Sell sponsoring HYPCCCYCL. I want to shout out my co-founder Julian Imchinsky. So yeah, that's a quality approach. With GDPR, with CCPA, right? You have to have human hands doing the dials. You have to be very
Mm.
careful on where the data is sourced. So that's been the hurdle too, is there's a lot of fear. Sending a ton of automated email, doing a ton of automated calls can look robocalls. Do we want that with our brand? The bigger problem is going out of business because you don't have enough pipeline. So remember,
Yeah.
the vendor has to deal with the regulation. You as the consumer just have to build a business, right? So
Mhm.
yeah.
Cool. And then on the data front, kind of purchasing a whole bunch of different providers, creating your own data lake, and then sourcing yourself. Um, how do you kind of combat the fact that you're inevitably going to spend a lot of money on if you're really going for a full push for tech powered sales?
Yeah. So in the book, I talked to Daniel Gray, who was a chief customer officer at Deluxe, which is a Fortune 5000. And he had a stack, which he called an endoskeleton. And he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this thing, and he put it out there on LinkedIn. And I was like, this is the moment. We have a C-level executive who's on the level of his stuff, who's investing heavily. Why? And he was driving serious pipeline with this thing, tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars. The thing is, it's a paradox. So there's been this huge movement to like, wow, we can get the SDRs, we can put them in tier 2 markets. Look how low the base salaries are. We can put them
Hmm.
offshore. And it's all like, we're doing all this sales stuff and it's so inexpensive. Look at the margin. No, make it expensive. Hire, hire senior people on the top of your funnel. Buy them as much tech stack as you can. Train them on the tech stack, and the vendors do a great job. Like they have universities and online portals, but to get advanced in outreach or sales loft, it can take time to be able to use all the functionality, the curly brackets, the, you know, conversation intelligence pieces, the customization, what you're saying of personalization of scale is very hard to do it, not gimmicky. Not like, hey, first name, I see that you raised $41 million. That stuff's passe, can't use it. So I think Lars Nilsson said the average rep now is about 2,000 per rep per month at a high growth company. Only 15% of high growth companies even use sales engagement platforms. So my advice is take that budget from 2 to 5,000 per rep per month, hire less reps, hire more experienced people, or have a really strong training program. And if you're gonna do tech stack optimization, have a RevOps team and get trained on these tools quarterly, semi-annually. And then also, like I said, create like a skunkworks where someone inside your organization, your RevOps team, is testing this stuff constantly, from the data to the systems to the process and the technology.
Interesting. Cool. We have a couple of questions here in the chat. So one question here is, do you consider communities as part of a tech stack?
Well, it's interesting because the whole idea of go-to-market strategy, I have to admit, was not on my radar. This company was started by Julia Nimchinsky and brought to me, and I started to think about go-to-market strategy because she introduced me to Mark Roberge, and I was doing an interview with him, and I was asking about getting sales teams to 10 million ARR, 100 million ARR, and he zooms out and talks about go-to-market strategy. Right. So part of a go to market strategy is owning your own branded community, and doing that on LinkedIn is more dangerous now. Look at the Facebook outage that just happened. Look at LinkedIn groups, it was deprecated. Look at Facebook pages where your reach was deprecated to 15%. Look at your reach on LinkedIn. You can do 100 ads per week now. I have 42,000 followers. And if I post, I might get a few likes. If I do a poll, it'll go crazy, right? But you need to own your own micro community. So we have a Slack channel, but that's part of our go-to-market strategy. So I do think that SDRs can roll up to marketing, and SDRs can be shepherds of the brand through things like front site chatbots and they can be in and tending to storytelling and conversations inside your private Slack channel that has the customers and you in it. You can do all these pods and these gimmicks in LinkedIn, but right, like Predictable Revenue has a really good event-based Slack channel that it kicks off for the conferences and things, and Salesforce has been effective with that. So yeah, I think Slack is the future.
I was having a conversation with somebody actually at SaaStr about the cold Slack. Like you can do Slack Connect now, where if you put an email address in, you can send somebody a Slack without contact beforehand, and that they were convinced that was the future of cold outreach, was going to be the Slack Connect. I don't know that I'm convinced yet, but it's just like that AI message. We'll see. I'm sure I'm going to start sending them in no time. But we have another question here from Scott, and I believe it was back when we were talking about all the dialers that you were talking about. But Scott is wanting to know from you, Justin, what are some of those vendors?
Who do the dialers?
Mm-hmm.
So the major ones are Connect and Sell, Orem, Monster Connect, and Concert with a K. It was called Connect Leader. And then there's other ones too. But if you want to get to those speeds and have the full functionality, those are the platform players. And yeah, friends with all the companies. I just do what's best for clients I work with. And disclosure, a lot of these folks sponsor our event and we're thankful. So what we're trying to do is bring the RevOps perspective to the GTM and say, here's a GTM stack, go use it. You tell us, plug it in, test it. I'd say test don't just rotely take the leader, pick a few, right? Run your own mini RFP. That's the key, because different TAMs and verticals and markets have different approaches, but I promise you, single dialing or doing area code switching, it's not enough. I'll make it simple. If you send an email one by one, or if you dial a phone one by one, that's dark ages. Like, it's not a modern approach. That's faster horses.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question that's popped in here from Michael McGowan. How do you equip a 24-year-old SDR to be taken seriously by a seasoned exec or business owner? That's a funny one. And honestly, Michael, I dealt with that myself, because I started as an SDR when I was like 22, yeah. And it was tough. Like, that one I felt was going to be more of a challenge than it was, I have to say. I don't think people necessarily know that you're as young as you are when you're having these interactions, if you kind of come at it with conviction. And actually, we did a podcast episode on exactly that with David Priemer, who talks about kind of the neuroscience behind coming across with conviction and confidence if you don't even have it. So we'll have Veronica, if you can, drop the link to that one in the chat. But Justin, curious to know your thoughts on that particular question.
Yeah, so I was always the youngest kid on the sales teams, because I was pretty deep on SaaS companies at 26, 27 in 2006, 7. People are like, I've been in SaaS since 2003. As I recall, there wasn't even an SDR then. I was just inside sales. I would wear a tie or try to, sound older, speak with a deeper voice, whatever. But then the co-founders of that company, mentors of mine, this guy, Eric Schrader, he said, how you speak adds 10 years. And what he meant was the acumen. And that day, I learned full cycle sales. I could demo the product. I could close the product. I could onboard the customer. I could provide customer support. We were a tiny little startup, and we were all super hands-on. But that's why I just tell people to develop business acumen. We had Anthony Iannarino on the GTM Games, and we had a chance to speak with him. And it was really fascinating. He thinks that's like, it's empty suits right now. So think about it. I'm not an ageist. Any generation, if you don't add value, if you don't have business acumen and understand the customers, not only their business, but the trends and their worldview and economic factors. So I would just say that, I got very far in this industry without a college degree. I got rejected from Salesforce and LinkedIn hundreds of times. And then thanks to Mark Benioff, they repealed the college university requirement, because for sales, it was like, well, let's look at your sales. And so it's become a meritocracy, which is it's such a cool profession, because you can raise yourself up from anywhere and climb very high in it. So I wouldn't let age get in the way. Just, do things to become a trusted advisor. And there was a great concept out of Sandler, which is equal business stature. It's like, there's always a very successful, powerful person being sold to by a rep. And that's okay, because in that moment, that person needs that rep's knowledge. You're equal during the sale. So be knowledgeable, learn how to technically demo, and just become a trusted advisor. It didn't take 20 years to do that. There's techniques and methodologies to get there faster.
Cool. Well, that's a perfect place to wrap it up. We're just 1 minute from the end of the live here. So thank you so much to Justin for joining us on this live. Please, guys, go check out HYPCCCYCL and the book at Tech Powered Sales. We dropped a link in there earlier, so you can just scroll up in the chat and you can pop over to Amazon and get yourself a copy. I actually have one waiting on the shelf at home, so I'm going to be reading it soon. And I know we missed a question from you, Kyle, at the end there. I'm actually going to answer it in the chat instead of keeping us all here live. And we got the link to that David Priemer podcast episode as well. But yeah, thank you so much all for